And so how do we deal with that in the moment to not just wish that we could be different people, but actually become different people as we, in a sense, align ourselves with God's purpose, as we allow God to work in our life, we listen to his words, we incorporate them in an active manner, because that's what happens here. So in verse 22, just to kind of go through it a wee bit, he says there, immediately, now we know from John, that's in the evening, he makes the disciples get into the boat. So that's, if you will, tuck that away, that's layer one of being in the middle of God's will, right? Because that's an important factor in this whole thing. They are in the middle of what God told them to do when all this stuff happens. They weren't rebellious. They weren't saying no to Jesus. They wouldn't say, you know what, hand out your own baskets. They did it. They did what they were supposed to do on the outside. So he dismisses the crowd, and after they dismiss them, he goes up to a mountainside to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was a considerable distance from the land. Now, in John 6, he tells us they're 3 or 4 miles from the land. Those are obviously American, that's translated for American English. They didn't use American miles. It might surprise you in the Bible. But that's approximately how far they are. They're 3 to 4 miles from the land. It says they're buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. The boat is buffeted by the waves. So it's interesting because the word buffeted there, it means tortured. It's the same word that you would use for tortured. So what's the point? The point is that this is not like some leisurely row, right? We've all seen Pole Dark or one of those where you have like some lady on the back of a boat with a parasol and you have some dude, just, and they're in love. That's not what's going on here. The boat is buffeted. It's being slammed against wind and rain. Have you ever tried to walk against the wind? Like you go out here, right, on the path, and you're just going for a walk, and we have a southern wind, and like when you're walking in the wind, you're like, I'm going to die, right? And then you turn around, you're like, walking is easy. This is incredible. Here we go. You ever tried to ride a bike against the wind? Same thing, right? Like, and then you turn around, you're like, oh, I just pulled my jacket out, and here I go. So it's the same thing. But worse, they're rowing. They're rowing against wind and waves. And then the boat is just getting slammed by them. Would that be frustrating to you? It'd be frustrating to me. I lived on a boat for about 5 years when I was about 5, from the ages of 5 to 10 in San Diego. And we got a couple times, my dad was he's like Jimmy Buffett, the second coming, my dad is, if you know who that is. And so he used to do, we would go out sailing sometimes. I remember going to Ensenada one time, and you think, oh, wow, sailing down to Ensenada. Yeah, not what you think. Not what you think at all. Plus, like, the sewage comes out in Ensenada. But anyway, so we're down in Ensenada, and I don't know if you know this, but there's, on boats, the stove top in the oven, the propane stove, has hinges. So you pull these little dogs out of it, and then it'll allow the thing to do, the stove to rock. It doesn't go all the way, though. It only goes 2 ways. And I just remember being on the boats about 8 o'clock at night. We're anchored off the coast of Ensenada, and my mom trying to cook some stew on this thing, and it's just like, kung, kung, and we're just rocking everywhere. And I remember, trying to sail home and the whole 9 yards, and it wasn't pleasant. There were none of us that were happy about it, except my dad. He was super into it, Spray is going everywhere, and we're all holding on for dear life in our life jackets, it's just the whole 9 yards. It's scary stuff. That's the thing about boats, right? You don't just pull over if a boat goes bad. You're not like, well, the engine died. We'll just get off right here. Catch a bus, right? You have to start involving the Coast Guard, whatever it might be. And so all I'm trying to point out is that if you put yourself in this situation with the timeline, with the hunger, with the serving, with the promises or things that they thought that they were due that they didn't get, all those things, they prompt something in humans, don't they? They prompt anger, they prompt frustration, they prompt anxiety, they prompt depression, right? They prompt fear. All those things in humans, that's what happens, right? And so Jesus, again, sends them away. They go on their boat ride. He goes to pray. Now we know from Mark there's cool insights because he says, and seeing them from the mountaintop. So from Mark, he tells us that Christ supernaturally, through the darkness, whether there's rain and storms or whatever, he sees them. And so he goes to walk to them. So if we continue reading here, It says they were a considerable way from the land, buffeted by the winds because the wind was against them. And shortly before dawn, so again, that's how we get our evening to 3 to 6 a.m. So, possibly as long as 12 hours. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. Now, the cool thing is, another interesting thing that Mark gives us, it says, and he would have passed them by. So he sees them from the mountain. He sees them rowing and struggling against the wind on the boat trip that he sent them on. And Mark's commentary is, he was going to walk right by him. He wasn't planning on stopping at the boat. It was just like, okay, you're doing what you're doing, I'm doing what I'm doing. You're doing what I called you to do, I'm over here walking, we're both going to end up in the same place. But they, instead, it says, it says them walking on the lake, verse 26, when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. Now, this is really interesting. So, once again, forgive me for the reiteration, the repetitiveness. We can all agree they're in the will of God, right? We know from Mark, and if you don't believe me, and I don't mean that in a sarcastic, weird way, you can look at it in Mark chapter 4, or actually in Mark chapter 6. Their hearts are hardened right now. They're upset by what they're going through. They come to this place in the middle of the will of God that they're not really happy about, and then they see something out on the ocean. But their response to it is, this is an apparition. This is some sort of supernatural apparition. And the weird thing about ghosts is that nobody really knows what they are or if they're real. I'm not trying to start an argument about where demons came from, or I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I don't care if people see ghosts or don't see ghosts. I don't think it's a big deal if they do. It just is what it is. It could be Satan, whatever. I'm not making a comment on that. Because Jesus is just stronger than ghosts, so I don't even have to sweat it. But my point is that in the middle of the will of God, they come to a very bizarre conclusion, right? This is an apparition. And not only on top of it is it an apparition or some sort of like misty funkiness, but it's going to hurt us. They're afraid of this apparition. So something that they don't understand, that they can't quantify, they don't like, and they're hard-hearted, and all of a sudden all this comes in, they see this ghost, and they begin to scream. And they're terrified, it says. And that's what it means they were shaking. And so the question becomes, why were they so afraid? What is fear? Why do we suffer with fear? Why do we have fear? And typically what fear is, it is a concern, right? Or it can be an emotional feeling, or it can be intellectual. But it is a concern that something that will harm me is about to take place, right? And it can be, there's a spectrum for fear, right? Because you have like, I'm concerned that my football team might lose. I guess that depends on who you are as far as like the spectrum that is. But you can be like, or I'm concerned that, whatever, my penmanship is not as good as I'd like it to be or whatever. All the way up to like, I'm concerned, like them, I might die. I may not live through this event. So fear, when it comes to us, what it is this idea that something unpleasant and something unreasonable, or maybe not unreasonable, but in the sense, something that is cannot be overcome is about to occur in my life. Or something that's going to cause me anguish is about to occur. And yet over and over and over again throughout the scripture, we are called to not fear, right? Now we feel fear and we have fear, but we're called to not fear and not give into it. So what happens, they scream out about fear, or with fear, I should say. But Jesus instead answers them, and he says this, immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. So this event takes place that they don't understand, it's actually from Jesus. This whole event is all from the hand of the Lord Jesus, right? They were there feeding because of Jesus, feeding the people because of Jesus. They were in the boat because of Jesus. They got scared and thought they misinterpreted who Jesus was, and they got scared by it, right? And so they scream out, but his response is, it's me. It's not a ghost. It's don't be afraid. Here's the thing with fear, and I don't want to sound like a jerk, but I might. A lot of us, probably all humans at one time or another, we want to deal with fear in an inappropriate way. We want to deal with fear by saying, oh, that won't happen. You'll be okay. Right? We deal with fear by denying the possibility. But intrinsically, we know that's invalid, right? Because nothing is guaranteed us. Nothing, save Christ. The idea of the super volcano in, Yosemite, or not Yosemite, but in Wyoming. Our very own favorite fault, 100 miles from us right now. Disease, famine, money, land, age, right? There is not one thing that any of us can do about any of those things. We could plan our retirement to the T, and we should probably be considering the future. I'm not putting that, but we could confirm it to the T, and it can all be wiped out in a moment. That's happened multiple times in our country and other countries throughout history. But we try to comfort ourselves and say, well, that won't happen. But that's not true. It's happened over and over and over again. We live in a very weird time in the world right now where in general, especially for our country, we've had over 200 years of locally peace. I realize we have the Gulf Wars in Korea, and I'm not minimizing those. But in our country, where we live, we've had peace. We don't experience real famine. We have the Dust Bowl, but for the most part, we don't. And so because it's out of our experience, we try to deal with it by saying, no, that's not true. But see, that's not really dealing with fear. That doesn't help fear, and we all know it when we're laying in the dark at night, and the reality comes back to us. The way that we deal with fear is we have to hit it head on. We have to be honest about it. We could die tomorrow. Our most precious possession could die tomorrow. Our money could die tomorrow. That is all very possible and very real because it's going to happen to millions of people tomorrow. And we might be those. But we deal with fear by not denying the possibility of things. We deal with fear by saying, but God. So I may have the worst thing I can imagine in my life happen to me, and I can say, you know what? The Lord is able to bring me through that. See, what happens is sometimes we start off in a wrong way because we say things like this, oh, I could never do that. That's a lie from hell. Oh, I could never be a part of that. Oh, I don't know what I would do if that happened to me. Well, if you want to walk with Jesus, I'll tell you what would happen. You would mourn like crazy. You would weep bitter tears. You would probably be scared and upset, go through depression and anxiety, and then hopefully the whole time you say, Lord, I need you to work. Lord, I acknowledge that you can fix this. Not maybe the situation, but you can fix me. Lord, I acknowledge that you can get me through the worst of this. See, how we meet fear and how we deal with it will decide really the path that our life takes. The more we retract and say, oh, I could never, or God wouldn't, or whatever it might be, the more the less that we experience, the less the less life, the vitality that we have. And the more that we're willing to look at something and say, that would be horrific, I don't know how I would do that, but God. That's where we truly live. That's where we have true freedom. True freedom is not an absence of bad things. It's a victory in the midst of bad things.